Which line?
Begin today the Gemara on Daf Samach Beis Amud Aleph, first line on the top of the page. Matzalei Metzer. So the Gemara before was discussing a person that's selling a property, and he writes in the document the boundaries of the properties that he's selling. Sometimes the boundaries that are written are not actually the exact boundaries that he's selling. And sometimes the boundaries that are used in the document is just for the purpose of describing the location of the property that he's selling. So you use a certain description with boundaries, but really what's being sold is less than what is included in that boundary. So here the Gemara continues and brings other cases that are related to this. Okay, so we're going to follow along here to understand the Gemara with the pictures that the Rashbam has in the side of the Gemara, as we'll see. Okay, so the first case here is Motzaloi Metzer, when a person is selling this property and he draws the boundaries. So one of the boundaries that he draws is Metzer Echad Orach. On one side the boundary is long, Metzer Echad Kotzer, and on the other side the boundary is short. Okay, so you see here the first picture on the page. So you have the boundaries on two sides, on Tzafan and Darim. On the two sides the boundary is full boundary, but then on one side, let's say on the Mizrach side, the boundaries he wrote in the document is only half. And on the Ma'ariv side, across it, the boundary is the full length of the field. So now it's not clear how to understand this boundary here. What exactly is he selling him? Did he sell him the whole length, even though on one side he only drew half of the boundary, or he only wrote half of the boundary, or not? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav, in such a case, Rav says, Loikana elo keneged hakotzer. He only acquires the part of the field that is according to the shorter boundary on the Mizrach side. And the other side, that even though there's a longer boundary, he does not acquire that. And over here we apply the point that was mentioned before, that even though on the other side he did write a longer boundary, but that's only for a purpose to describe to him the location of this field, so he describes to him that border, that boundary which extends longer. But from the fact that on the other side he only wrote a shorter boundary, it's an indication that he only means to sell him half of this property. The other half was just a matter of locating the property. It's not what he intends to sell. So only acquires half. Rav Kahana and Avasi say to Rav, though, why should you say that he only acquires half? In such a case, where on one side there's a half boundary, on the other side there's a full boundary, longer, that goes from one end to the other end of the field, maybe we should say that his intention is as follows. He should acquire going to the edges of the two boundaries that he wrote and make a diagonal line from the edge of the shorter boundary to the longer boundary, and say that maybe that was his intention. It's more logical to say that the seller wanted to sell with a diagonal line across, as you see in the picture later here in the Rashbam, the next picture down. All right, so the top boundary going with a diagonal line across from the tip of the shorter boundary to the longer boundary. The second picture. See this is the second picture? So maybe we should say that it's more logical to say that this is what he intended to sell. Instead of saying just half, it should be with a diagonal line across. Shasik Rav. When Rav heard this question from Rav Kahana and Avasi, it was quiet. And in this case, Shasik Rav actually means that he accepted their question, which means he agreed to them, and will paskin like Rav Kahana and Avasi that he actually does acquire more than half. With that, you acquire with the diagonal line going across. But now the Gemara goes back and explains, according to what Rav had originally said, that when there's a shorter boundary, that you only acquire that half of the field. But Umayde Rav, even after Rav said that, Rav will agree. If the case is that this property that this person is selling, so on one side of his field you have Reuven and Shimon, meaning when he writes the boundaries of the property. So let's say on the Mizrach side you have Reuven and Shimon that are there. Levi v'Yehuda mechad gisa. And on the other hand, you have Levi and Yehuda that live on the other side. Now, in this case, what the person did is just like before, in the first case. On one side, he writes, I'm selling you the boundary of Reuven, and my field is on the side of Reuven and Shimon. And he wrote him the entire boundary, including Reuven and Shimon. On the other side, he only wrote half. And over here, he wrote, I'm only selling you, he only wrote the boundary of Yehuda. He didn't mention the boundary of Levi. So it's the same like the first case here, but the only difference is that over here, there are different people that own the properties around this property that he's selling. Again, on the Mizrach side, it's Reuven and Shimon, And on the Ma'ariv side, in the bottom, as the picture, the third picture in the Rashbam is Levi and Yehuda. So he writes them again, Reuven and Shimon, and then on the other side only Yehuda. And he doesn't write the boundary of Levi. Now in such a case, Rav will agree that the halacha is like what Rav Kahana and Ravasi said, that it's Reish Toir, that we say that his intention was to sell with that diagonal line that goes from the tip of the border of Yehuda down to the edge of the border of Reuven. And the Gemara explains why in this case it would be simple that even Rav would agree to this, even according to what Rav had said in the beginning. Because he should have written Metzer, the Bacher says, he should have written Metzer the Reuven Keneged Levi, or the Shimon Keneged Yehuda. When he writes the boundaries, so either he should write that I'm selling you the field and the border on the west is Levi and across of it is Reuven on the east, or he should have written Shimon is on the east and across of it is Yehuda on the west. Why would he write on one side the full boundary and he names both Reuven and Shimon? And on the other side, he only writes a half a boundary and he names only Yehuda and not Levi. The fact that he specifies in that way, it's clear. It's clear that what he meant to sell is that on one side I'm selling you the full length of the property of Reuven and Shimon, and on the other side he's selling only the property according in the boundary of Yehuda, and therefore you have to draw a diagonal line, and that's what's included in the sale. That's in this case. Whereas in the previous case, where you have one shorter border and one longer border, since over there on one side you don't have the same, like in this case, where you have different people that are owning on both sides of the property. You have, let's say on that side where there's a longer border, it's only one person that owns it. So therefore he wrote in that border, and he wrote the name of that one person, which extends all the way across, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he meant to sell the whole entire thing across. Over there, Rav originally had said that we say that he only meant to sell half of the property. Another case, Matzer, Reuven, Mizrech, or Ma'ariv, we have the borders of this property. And both on Mizrach and Ma'ariv, now this is the fourth picture here, further down in the Rashbam. You see you have Reuven that lives on the borders of this property that's being sold. He lives both on Mizrach and Ma'ariv of this property. And Ometza Shimon, and Shimon lives both on Tzafon and Darim, on the north and the west, north and the south, that is, of this property. And so when the seller is making clear and writing what are the borders of the property, so he's telling him, I'm selling you this field which is between the properties of Reuven and Reuven and Shimon. But when he writes over here the borders, he has to specify and write Tzarech lemichtav lei Metzer Reuven Ruchen Train, that the borders of the property that Reuven lives on the side of it, there's two borders for Reuven, and Umetza Shimon Ruchen Train, and there's two borders where Shimon lives beside this property, both on Tzafon and Darim. And if you don't write that, if he's just going to write in the document, I'm selling you this property which borders on the properties of Reuven and Shimon, and you don't specify that means Reuven on both sides and Shimon on both sides, then you would say that maybe he only sold him half of the property. As you see in the picture of the Rashbam, there's a line that's drawn across the center, a diagonal line drawn across, that if you would only write just the borders of Reuven and Shimon, then you could say maybe he sold him just one half, whether the top half or the bottom half. So therefore he has to specify clearly that I'm selling you this property, and on both sides you have the borders of Reuven, and on the other two sides you have the borders of Shimon. Or you can just specify very specifically, Mizrach and Ma'ariv is Reuven and Tzafon and Darim is Shimon. Otherwise it wouldn't be clear if he's selling him the entire property. Shaila was asked in the following case where he's making the borders. The seller writes, Siyim loy esakrones. He specifies the corners of the properties that he's selling to him. So this is the picture that you have here in the Rashbam, the picture that's right below the picture that we just were talking about, where he shows him just the corners of the field. And that's what he specifies in the document that he's selling him. Mahu, what's going to be the halacha in this case? Which means either you could say that because he just writes those corners of the field, so then maybe that means that he's only selling him, as you see here in the picture, one row across from one corner to the other, like an X, as you see it here in the picture. That he's only, you see the picture of the X, yeah, because he only showed him he only wrote in the document the corners. That means maybe that he's only selling him the row of those corners going across, but not more. He's not selling him the rest of the property. Or maybe maybe you could say that by writing the corners, he means to say that he's including everything within this property and he's just specifying the corners. Another shaila based on this, if in this case we're going to say that the kavanah of him selling the corners, that means that he's only going to be kind of the corners and not more than that, the shaila would be now, in the next case, kimin gam. If he specified that he's selling him and he wrote kimin gam. Gam, the Shpam says that it's a chof yavon, this is a ois yavonis, a Greek letter that's similar to the chof. This is the lange chof. As you see here in the picture, the next picture over of the Rashbam, that he wrote in the corners, 2 corners. Right. So but the 2 corners of it's different than in the previous case. In the previous case, he just specified mamish the corners. Here, he wrote like a chaf, which is already extending into both sides, both directions of the corners. So now over here, the shaila is, what do you say in this case? Maybe you could say that in the previous case, since he only mamish specified the corners, over there, maybe he means to sell him only the line of those corners, but not more. But in this case, though, where it's like that chaf, which extends further into the sides of the corners, maybe it's clear that he means to sell him the entire property. Or maybe you could say, even in this case, as you have the next picture below, in the last picture on the page of the Rashbam, that even in this case, he only meant to sell him that row of property, a wider row, that's within the border of the gam, of the chaf yavan, of the chaf that there is, that he specified in the document. A third case, mahus. Okay, so that's the shaila of the gam. A third case, the Gemara asks, b'seid again, mahu. If you're going to say that Rashbam here explains that these hibayis here are imtim tzalaima. If you're going to say in the previous case that when he makes him the siman of the property as that chaf in the corners, and there it means that he's only selling him that row that's within that border that he made specifically, and not more. So over here, what's if it's besedikin? And besedikin means that he's skipping around, and that the case is, as you have here in the picture of the Rashbam, where the borders of the property, on each side there are 2 people that own properties. There's Reuven Shimon on the east, Levi Yehuda on the north, and then Zvulun and Yisachar on the west, and Yosef ben Yamin on the north, on the south, that is. So, and then when he writes in the properties, so he writes on the east, he writes he's selling the border of Reuven, and on the north there's the border of Levi, and then there's the border of Yisachar, there's the border of Yosef, and he skips around. He doesn't specify all the names of the borders of the different people that own around his property when he's writing the borders of the property. So in such a case, when he skips around, what do you say? Do you say that in such a case, it's not mistaver to say that he's selling him a property, 1 piece yes, 1 piece not, 1 piece yet, it's not, a person doesn't sell this way. Usually you're selling a property, you sell one strip, 1 piece. So in this case, he's skipping around, it actually must mean that he's just writing him a portion of the border on each side, then he really means to sell the entire property. And you can't compare it to the previous cases where there's a svara to say that there's one full strip. But there is still a svara to say that over here, in this case, he did mean to sell him only that strip that he specified. So then it is going to be, as you see here in the picture of the Rashbam, there is going to be kaina in one corner, and then the next corner is not kaina, the next part is kaina, and so on. And you go around, and he's selling him, skipping around only different portions of the property. So Teiku, these questions here remain unresolved.
So the Kohen doesn't know whether you bought this or that until Mashiach comes. For many generations or whatever to come.
So let's assume the Gemara is going to say, well, in such a case, the halacha always is in such a case that we say Hamaitzi mechavere olavaraya. So the meicher that will come and claim that I didn't sell you more than that limited part, or in this case I was skipping around and I didn't mean to sell you the whole thing. So the meicher keeps what he claims is his, and the lekeich is going to have to bring a proof that he did intend to sell him the entire thing. That's always the cloud by Hamaitzi, that when there's any doubt, suffix regarding money, Hamaitzi mechavere olavaraya. Well, that's halacha any teiku. Anytime you have teiku in Gemara by dinei maminis, teiku means it's a suffix. We don't know how to determine. No, you can't ask the meicher, because the meicher is going to come and tell us afterwards. You have to have a clear raya. If with Eidim, Shas Ma'aseh, what did he say? If the meicher comes and says afterwards, I don't know if that's going to be. I don't think it's going to be a raya. You have to have clearly what the words of the shtar that was written mean to know, or something that he said clearly. There was what they made up in Shas Ma'aseh when they were selling to him. Okay, so it remains a suffix, but halacha is a mitzvah chaver alavaraya. Okay, Now another case, Matzaloi, Metzer Rishoin, Umetzer Sheni, Umetzer Shlishi. A person selling a property, and he writes in the document very clearly what's the first, second, and third boundaries of this property. But Umetzer Revi, the fourth boundary, Loi Matzaloi. He didn't write what that boundary is. So there's the machlokes about this. What do we say? Omar Rav, so Rav says, Kona Koil, he acquires the entire property, Chutz Mimetzer Revi. Besides that area by the fourth border, so there's one line of one row of whatever's there. That row by the fourth border, he does not acquire. That's why the Meichel left it out. Ushmuel Amar, however, Shmuel says, Afile Meitzer Revi, the Bachat's Kona. Even the fourth border, even that last row that's there by the fourth border, he acquires it as well. Once he writes the three borders, he feels like I don't have to write the fourth border. It's self-understood where the fourth border is, because the other two borders, they extend to that place, so it's clear he doesn't have to write it. Sorry. Now, the third opinion, but Ravasi Omar, Ravasi says, in such a case, when you write three borders for a property, you actually only acquire those three borders, the three rows along those three borders, meaning like the shape of a ches. That's all you acquire. The rest of the property inside, you don't acquire anything. If he didn't write the fourth border, it's just the borders itself that he meant to sell. So the Gemara explains Ravasi's opinion. Savalak Rav, he holds similar to Rav's opinion that we had before, the Omar Shiyure Shaya, that he intends to leave over. The seller did not write the borders fully because he intends to leave over for himself. As we had before, Rav said this in the case where on one side you wrote a full border and the other side you wrote a half a border. So Rav had the svara to say that means he only actually sold him half. So over here is what Ravasi says. If you're not writing the fourth border, that means that the seller means to leave for himself. And over here we say that since he leaves over that fourth border, he doesn't mention at all the fourth border. That means he really intends to leave over the entire property for himself, and he only means to sell the rows that are along those three borders that he wrote in the document. Rava said about this case, who do we paskin like? Hilchase, the halacha is Kana hakoil chutz mimeitzer revi. You acquire the entire property besides that row that's there by the fourth border, like Rav's opinion. Okay, but he doesn't say clearly that he's paskening like Rav, because here he's going to come and qualify when we apply this. And this was only said Elo Doloi Mivla. If that row that there is by the fourth border is not absorbed, it's not within the other parts of the border that he did specify for him. Okay, so the picture of Loi Muvla you have over here on the side in the Rashbam, on the left picture. The next picture down on the Rashbam, the left picture is where you see that row is Loi Muvla.
What's Loi Muvla? What is?
It's not absorbed. The fourth border is not within the borders that he did specify. They don't extend all the way to the fourth border. So the fourth border, that row of the fourth border, is outside of the borders that he did specify. Over there we say that that row is not included in the sale. You have it right away. You see that? Okay. Avol Mivla, but if that fourth border that he did not specify is absorbed within the borders that he did specify, like you have it here in the right picture on the Rashbam, Kana. So then he will acquire everything, including that row of the fourth border as well. Now, furthermore, he qualified V'chi loy mivla nami, even when it's not absorbed within those borders that he specified. So lo yamaran, it wasn't said that he will not acquire that. Ela de ikale richve de dikle. If that fourth border either has its own row or its own chain of palm trees, so it has a significance for itself, that we can say that the seller meant to keep it for himself, or v'havatishus kaven, or it's an area that can produce the amount of 9 kav of wheat if you plant there. So that's significant for itself. Then it's left out. But if that fourth row that's outside, it's not absorbed within the borders, but it's not an area that you have trees planted there, or in v'havatishus kaven, and it's not an area that can produce 9 kaven of grain if you planted there. So then you will acquire the Bachad's Afagav Dolei Mivla, even if it's not included within the borders that you specified. Nevertheless, Kana you will acquire.
Not the call.
You will acquire the entire thing. So now the Gemara explains based on what Rava said here. This version of what Rava said, as we'll see soon, there'll be another version. So the Gemara now explains Mechlal. So from this we understand the Chi Muvla. When that fourth border, that fourth row, that's by the fourth border, is absorbed within the lines that of the other two borders that he wrote, even if that fourth row does have in it a row of palm trees, and or it is a row that has an area that you can plant enough wheat to produce 9 kav. And seemingly it would be significant to say that the seller meant to leave it out, but because it's absorbed within the borders that he did specify, kana, the buyer will acquire this. This is one version of the way Rava paskin regarding this case. Another version is Ikidamri Amar Rava, that Rava said Hilchase, that the halacha is like what Shmuel said, kana koil va'afila meitzer revi. In this case, when he didn't specify the fourth border, he acquires everything, including the fourth border. But on that, Rava qualified and said, V'lo yamaran, when the way paskin like Shmuel, that it's all included, Elo de mivla. That's only if that the row of what there is, and by the fourth border, is absorbed within the borders that he did specify. Avaloi mivla. If it's not absorbed, then loy kani. He will not acquire it. Like we will not apply Shmuel's opinion. And furthermore, he qualified v'chi mivlanami, that fourth row that there is by the fourth border, even if it is absorbed within the lines that he specified. Lo yamaran el dikale richve de dikle. That's only if that fourth row there is no chain of trees that are planted there. V'lo yavatishas kaben, and it's not an area that can produce 9 kaven of grain if you plant. Avol ikale richve de dikle v'avatishas kaben. But if it's an area that there's trees planted there, or they can produce 9 kaven of grain, then that's significant for itself, and loikana. Even if it's absorbed within the borders that he did specify, still you will not acquire because it has a significance for itself. Okay, so now the Gemara here will spell out okay, first the Gemara, one more thing. So the Gemara says, what do you understand from this version of what Rava said? Miklal, from this we understand, the Chiloi Movla, when that row on the fourth side is not absorbed within the borders that he specified, Afagav the lekale richve de dikle v'lo yavatishas kabin, even if it does not have significance for itself because it doesn't have a lot of trees there and it can't produce 9 kavin, nevertheless, because it's not absorbed, loy kani, it will not be acquired, it's not included in the sale. Okay, so now here the Gemara goes on to specify what is the difference between the two versions of what Rava said. There are certain things that in both versions of Rava they agree of what Rava said, and then there are details that there's an argument between the two versions of what Rava said. Some Rishonim say that the next piece of the Gemara here that specifies this is not part of the Gemara itself, but this was added later by Rav Yehuda Goin from the Goinim. It's not so common the Gemara should go through this kind of discussion to explain the difference between two versions. So the Gemara says as follows: Shamina mitarvayu. We do understand from both versions of Rava, mitarvayu lishna di Rava, they both would agree the besade that regarding what's inside this property, we don't say like the opinion of Rav Asi, that when he is selling and writes only 3 borders, that he only meant to sell the rows of those 3 borders and inside not. No, both versions of Rava disagree with that. We're paskening that he meant to sell him what's inside this property, and he didn't leave that over. And also, both versions of Rava will agree, V'shamina nami, the heiche de mivla, when that fourth row that there is by the fourth border is absorbed within the borders that he wrote to him. And also, additionally, V'leka alei richve de dikle, it's an area where there are no trees planted there, V'lehavatishas kaven, and it's not an area that can produce 9 kaven. Both versions of Rava will agree that kana, that he will acquire this. Because here you have 2 positives. You have 2 positives to say that it should be included. It's absorbed within the borders that he wrote, and you see that there's no trees or anything else planted there that should give it a significance for itself. So when there's those 2 positives, both opinions of Rava, both versions of Rava will agree that he acquires it. On the other hand, if it's loy mivla, if the row that there is on the fourth border is not absorbed within the borders that he wrote, and also, additionally, v'ikka alei richve de dikle, and it's an area that has trees there separately, or v'avet kabin, or can produce 9 kaven of grain there separately. So over here now you have 2 negatives. You have 2 reasons to believe that it's not included in the sale. It's out of the borders that he wrote him, and it has things that could be planted there significantly, separately. Then leikana. Both versions of Rava will agree that he will not acquire. However, where will they argue? In a case of mivla, Ve'ekale, on one hand, it is absorbed within the borders. That seems like it should be included in the sale. But on the other hand, it has trees that are planted there separately, or you can produce wheat over there separately. Or on the other hand, loy mivla, if it's not absorbed within the borders. But veleka ale, but on one hand that's a negative, that it's not included in the borders. But on the other hand, there is no separate row of trees there that you can plant. So in such a case, when you have one positive and one negative, when there's the shaila whether it's included in the sale, here is we have the machlokes between the first and second version of Rava. Itmala lahaigers gisa. You have the first version of Rava that says, and in such a case it will be included in the sale. Itmala lahaigis, and you have the second version that says that it will not be included in the sale. So that's where the machlokes comes out. And here, very interestingly, the Gemara paskins in such a case where it's not clear whether it's included in the sale or not. What do? Shuda de daini. Here we apply the concept of Shuda Daini, which literally means that the judges throw it to who they see fit, who to give it to. There's always a machlokes about the concept of Shuda Daini, whether it means that Chachamim have to use their intuition to see whether he meant to sell it or not, or that means that the Bezdin just chooses who they give it to, whether they leave it by the seller or they give it to the buyer. Taisus here points out that this is an unusual psak din, because as I mentioned before, usually in such a case when there's a suffix, the halacha is hamaitzi mechavere olavaraya. But here though, the Gemara is paskening shuda, the daini, the chachamim decide to give it who they want. Over here, it's a different case. Kanir over here, Taisus doesn't explain. Taisus just says it's a different. I don't think Taisus gives any hesba for this. Over here, Kanira, that it is a case where you can see, you can decide whether the seller meant to include it or not, and therefore we leave it up to the bezdin to decide who they want to give it to. Dr. Gemara Vaita, Omar Rabbe said, and here it speaks also about a case where it's not so clear what a person meant to sell, and this is a case of partners. And one of the partners is selling the property. So when he writes that he sells, so if he wrote, Palge, the Isli Ba'ara, so he says, I'm the half that I own, that I have in this property, that's what I'm selling. So what does that mean? Palge, that means that he's selling half. He's a partner, he owns one half. And he writes palga, that means he's selling his full part, his half. However, if he writes a different language than what he's selling, he says, palga be'ara de isli, half of what I own within this property. So then what does that mean? Over here, the word palga refers to the ba'ara, that only half of what I own within this property is what I'm selling. That means riva. That means he's only going to be selling a quarter, because he owns half, and half of that is what he's selling, a quarter. That's the difference between these expressions. So Abaye says to Rabbe, why are you dividing it this way? Ma'ishna hachi or ma'ishna hachi. What's the difference between these two languages that you say that here he means to sell his full half, and here he's selling only half of it, what he owns, which is a quarter? In other words, Abaye held that you can't really make such a difference in these languages. Even when he says palga ba'ara de isli, the word palga should apply to the word de isli. The half that I own is what I'm selling. You don't have to say that it means palga of the ara de isli, but you can interpret it the same way like the first expression, that he means to say the half that I own is what I'm selling. So it's not enough to say that he only means to sell a quarter. Ishtik. So Rabbi was quiet, and Rabbi did not respond to what Abaye asked him. And Abaye said, "Ana savri, I thought with the ishtik, from the fact that Rabbi was quiet when I asked him this, kubuli kibla, that he accepted what my question was, and therefore he took back what he said, and there's no distinction between these two expressions. But v'loi, that's not true. That's not why I was quiet. Chazine hanishtari the nafgimi beimar. I saw these documents that came out from Rabbi, the master. Eksivuhu hachi, and it was written in the documents these two languages. One was written palga de isli ba'ara, half of what I own in this property, which over here it means palga, half, which is what I do own, his whole entire what he owns in this property, and then it specified that there palga, that the buyer gets half. And then when he wrote the other expression, palga be'ara de isli, that half of what I own within this property, which is, and there the document, it said riva, that means that he only gets a quarter. So I see that Rabbi did not retract from what he said, and he still held of his opinion that there's a difference in these expressions, whether it means half or only a quarter. Another case, the Gemara says, V'omar Rabbi said, meitza ara, dimino palga. So Rabbi said, okay, you know what? This is okay. I guess it goes all the way up in the next case. Okay, we'll leave it for tomorrow. We'll go through this case tomorrow. Okay.